is just fantastic. Captain's Log, Subject 220419.1. When one has a personal connection to a pup, there is a risk of bias, preferential treatment, or even worse, a risk of a pup escaping. When we get an inmate like this, we remove their tongues and feed them to the cannibals. Welcome everyone to the halls of injustice. Today we welcome inmate number 124 to the ISO cubes. His name is Paul Sinnick. And this one is going to be quite interesting, not because of the crimes he's committed, although they are themselves quite depraved, but because of one really irritating fact. He went to school with my mother, and I went to school with his children. In fact, we lived 3 doors apart. He was a good friend to my family. We spent a fair amount of time around each other in my teenage years. I played basketball with his son. I was quite close to one of his daughters, in fact. But as his crimes started in 1992 and ended in 2008 with me being a neighbour of his in 2001, it can safely be surmised that he was not the person I thought he was even when I knew him. Personal connections can of course cloud one's judgment, but in this case there is going to be no clouding. It just affords me something of a luxury. I know enough about him to be able to provide you with suitable context as to the type of person he was. On the surface anyway. So we shall start with who Paul Sinnick is, the crimes he committed, the charges and the UK law, along with the sentence. So let us now begin with who is Paul Sinnick, aka inmate number 124. Paul Sinnick, aka inmate number 124, is a filthy nonce from the area of Merstham, Surrey. He had, I believed, either 3 or 4 children. He was married to somebody. I'm not going to name all these people, by the way, out of respect for their privacy, but also because I don't think they want to be associated with this filthy nonce. I had believed when I knew him he worked on the railways. He is a very tall, very strong man, quiet, unassuming, but got on very well with a lot of people. He, in his spare time, liked to play basketball with his son, football with groups of people, and partook in production racing at the Banger track in Smallfield, another area where I spent my childhood. I like Smallfield. He was also a fan of boxing. I did in fact watch my very first pay-per-view at his home, watching Prince Nassim Hamed getting his face pasted in by Barrera, along with being a skilled guitar player. He fit in really well with the community. People respected him because he worked hard. He always gave off the impression that he was hardworking, outgoing, friendly, relaxed, calm. However, I do recall being present the one time his son did something he shouldn't have done, and that temper was terrifying to 16-year-old me. A man a foot taller, a lot broader, a lot stronger. He didn't even have to say anything to be terrifying. In hindsight, this is all quite relevant, not least because you can tell where some of this applies to the crimes he committed once we go through the crimes he's committed. Over the time that I knew him, I spent a number of nights at his home while playing video games with his son or hanging out with one of his daughters. His very relaxed nature did in fact surprise me, and the reason why is because 3 out of the 4 children that lived in the home that I knew him living in, that makes any sense, all suffered from frequent epileptic attacks. 2 of them attended a special type of school because the nature of their attacks were so frequent they needed to be in a specialized school for that. With the youngest, the son who I played basketball, football with and video games with, going to the same school I went to, but not suffering from anywhere near the level of frequent attacks as his 2 sisters. So now you know a little bit about the filthy nonce, inmate number 124. Now would be a good time to talk about the crimes of Paul Sinnick. The crimes that Paul Sinnick was charged with go back to 1992. At the time, he would have been 29 or 30 years old, and stopped in 2008. It wasn't until 2017 that he finally faced justice for the crimes he committed. So how did Paul Sinnick manage to go unnoticed for all that time? There are known 4 victims. Those 4 victims age range between 3.5 years old all the way up to mid-teens. And the way he managed it was through intimidation. Let's not forget here, this man back then, in the prime of his life, was a terrifying man. He used intimidation to force his victims into silence. That is his main tactic. The issue when we talk about the crimes, though, is there isn't too much information going into detail as to what he did, but we do have a whole list of charges for each individual victim, with the one prevailing theme being his threat of dire consequences if any of them ever came forward. Understandably, now much older, they're able to, but that same fear because of what he did to them and what he threatened to do to them if they spoke about it, kept them silent for up to 24 years. For the sake of context, the charges on the victims who we will call A, B, C, and D are as follows. 5 charges of indecent assault and 2 of indecency with a child on victim A. 3 allegations of indecent assault, 2 of indecency with a child, and 1 of attempted rape against victim B. 4 offences of indecent assault on victim C, and 1 charge of sexual assault on victim D. The thing here is, there are actually more. If you include 1 offence of rape against victim C, which we will now state he was cleared of, a 2nd allegation of raping victim C, and 1 charge of assaulting victim D by penetration, unfortunately no verdict was able to be reached by the jury, so we are going to focus on the others instead. And because of the outcome of this case, the prosecution would not pursue a retrial on the 2 unresolved counts. That should give you a sufficient enough scope as to the severity of these crimes. Granted, we all here appreciate context, but it is very limited, and there wasn't much in the way of reporting of this crime when it happened, and when he was sent down, which does disappoint me quite a bit, because people like Paul Sinnick should be put on blast. So now I want to go through the charges and the law related to them. In total, there are 12 counts of indecent assault. Indecent assault is defined as sexual assault that does not involve rape. Also as unwanted sexual contact. Anything physical that could be construed in a sexual way that has been undertaken without the victim's consent can also be considered indecent assault. So this could include kissing without consent, touching a part of the body of another person in a sexual manner without consent, interacting with them physically in any other way to which they did not consent, along with assaulting them by penetration with a foreign object. Additionally, indecent assault can also include making the victim watch sexual activity against their will, along with engaging in sexual activity with a vulnerable person or one who is unable to legally give their consent. For the 4 counts of indecency with a child, we go to the Indecency with Children Act of 1960. Indecency conduct towards young child. 1. Any person who commits an act of gross indecency with or towards a child under the age of 14, or who incites a child under that age to such an act with him or another, shall be liable on conviction on indictment to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years. 2. On a charge of an offence under this section, the wife or husband of the accused shall be competent to give evidence at every stage of the proceedings. Now, something already stands out to me, and it's because I know how long he got sentenced for. Something about this doesn't feel quite right. Based on what we've done so far, you'll understand momentarily. Rape is defined under the Sexual Offences Act of 2003. 1. A person A commits an offence if A. He intentionally penetrates the vagina, anus, or mouth of another person, B. with his penis, B. does not consent to the penetration, and C. A. does not reasonably believe that B. consents. 2. Whether a belief is reasonable is to be determined having regard to all the circumstances, including any steps A. has taken to ascertain whether B. consents. 4. A person guilty of an offence under this section is liable on conviction or indictment to imprisonment for life. So now I would like to talk about the trial and the sentence of Paul Sinnick. During the 2-week trial, Paul Sinnick pled not guilty to each and every single charge, declaring them lies, adding that he was reluctant to be left alone in the room with any young girl in case he was ever accused. During that same trial, victim impact statements were handed to the judge, which showed all 4 girls had suffered psychological scars as a result of what they had been put through. One of them had taken to cutting herself in acts of self-harm, which was then disclosed by the judge. During one of these horrendous incidents, while Paul Sinnick was molesting one of these girls, he was punching himself in the face in disgust, describing himself as a dirty fucking bastard, which did not at any point stop him from continuing with what he was doing. After a 2-week trial at the Guildford Crown Court, Paul Sinnick, inmate number 124, was found guilty of all the charges I earlier read to you, with the obvious exception being him being found not guilty of 1 count of rape and 2 verdicts not given for 2 charges that they could not prove definitively. With that, we come to a sentence, and this I found interesting, and obviously I will now explain with the sentence. He was sentenced to 24 years in prison, with the judge confirming that even if he served half the sentence, there is no guarantee he will be released at the halfway stage, along with being placed on the sex offenders register for life. The part that had me curious was whether or not all the charges of indecent assault or indecency with a child were running concurrently on top of rape, because rape charges have up to life, indecency with a child up to 2 years. So does the sentence, when you add all the charges together that he was found guilty of, match what the sentencing guidelines dictate? Now yes, means assessed all the way through. There are a lot of charges, and to me 24 years is not enough. But I can understand with him now being 57 and still having many years left on his ticket, he will be a lot older and a lot weaker, less of a threat to society at large. I understand that. But when it comes to crimes like this, my view is always life, without the possibility of parole, because we cannot take the risk. So as we are done with this, I would love to know what you all think. Please do let me know in the comments down below. I hope you all have a fantastic day, except for that filthy nonce, and thank you all very much for listening. Ta-ta.